It was a Monday unlike any other in London. The air outside the UK's highest court felt heavier than usual, thick with expectation, tension, and an unspoken sense of history. People who had followed the royal family closely for years whispered among themselves. Cameras clicked, pens scribbled, and yet there was a quiet, almost hesitation in the way the world watched, because no one knew what exactly would happen next. But one thing was clear. Today, Prince Harry was not just a prince. He was a man facing the unthinkable. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. What would it feel like to sit in a courtroom where every word, every gesture, every expression could be dissected, twisted, and weaponized against you? For Prince Harry, that moment had arrived. Back in London, he was confronting the final chapter of a legal battle that had consumed years of his life. A battle not merely about newspapers, headlines, or celebrity gossip, but about the very notion of privacy, trust, and truth in the life of someone who had once been born into the world's most scrutinized family. Imagine walking into a courtroom where your past, your choices, and your most private moments are being judged under a microscope, where a misstep, a pause, a glance could be interpreted as guilt. And yet, Prince Harry didn't walk in alone. He brought with him a team, a small, meticulously selected group of lawyers, advisors, and confidants, each aware of the stakes. They had prepared for this day. Or had they? Because as much as preparation could shield a person, some moments are unpredictable. Some verdicts hit differently than anyone could anticipate. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. Prince Harry had returned to London not as the carefree royal who once laughed and waved from a balcony, but as a man stepping into the eye of a storm he could neither predict nor fully control. The city itself seemed to sense it. There was an unusual stillness, broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional murmur of reporters waiting beyond the cordons of steel. Why London? Why now? One might wonder if the timing itself was a calculated move. After months of private deliberation, late-night consultations with lawyers, and careful strategizing, Harry chose this city, this courtroom, this precise moment. But was it courage? Or desperation? Or something more nuanced? Something only those closest to him could possibly understand. As he walked through the courthouse doors, flanked by legal aides and a small contingent of security, there was a visible change in his demeanor. Not fear exactly, but a tension that spoke of anticipation, of knowing that nothing about today would be ordinary. Could anyone truly prepare for the kind of scrutiny that awaited him? Could anyone anticipate the subtle ways in which every glance, every pause, every slip of paper might be used against them? The allegations were staggering. Conspiracy, fraud, dishonesty, each word a punch, echoing far beyond the walls of the courtroom. They weren't just accusations. They were lenses through which every previous action would now be reinterpreted. And yet, what struck observers most was not the cold, clinical wording of legal documents, but the human element. How would a man who had spent years defending his privacy respond when that very privacy was under assault in front of the world? Inside the courtroom, the air was taut with expectation. Lawyers shuffled papers, whispered under their breath, glanced at each other with expressions that combined strategy, caution, and a certain wariness. Reporters, photographers, and court staff watched silently, aware that what would unfold here could become a defining moment, not just in the case itself, but in Harry's public and private life. And then came the opening exchanges. Short sentences, carefully measured, the kind of language that carries weight precisely because it leaves room for interpretation. Harry's legal team began laying out the framework, detailing the background of the alleged violations. There were emails, documents, phone records, fragments of a larger puzzle, each piece capable of shifting public perception. But crucially, the most consequential elements were still withheld from view. What exactly had been uncovered? What conversations, what decisions, what hidden communications would soon come to light? We have to ask, can a man truly defend himself when the full scope of evidence is never entirely visible? When the world watches, hungry for scandal, for proof of misdeeds, and for moments of weakness? It's a question that cuts to the core of not only this trial, but the nature of fame, privilege, and privacy in the modern era. There was a particular moment that those present later described with a mixture of astonishment and unease. Harry leaned forward slightly, listening intently to a line of questioning that seemed, at first glance, almost procedural. And yet, his reaction was not procedural. A subtle tremor in his hands, a hesitation in his breathing. Observers would later interpret this as fatigue, tension, perhaps even the weight of realization that the narrative being painted was slowly slipping into public consciousness, unfiltered, unedited, unavoidable. What exactly was going through his mind at that moment? Did he consider the years he had spent building a post-royal identity, carefully curating his public image, managing private foundations, engaging in humanitarian work, and now see it threatened by allegations he never imagined facing? The emotional contrast is stark. A prince once lauded for courage, now confronted by uncertainty so palpable it could almost be felt in the courtroom's atmosphere. And yet, Harry was not passive. Witnesses noted a precision in his responses, a deliberate effort to control both language and body. There was a tension between vulnerability and authority, between human frailty and cultivated resilience. Each gesture, each carefully weighed word carried the weight of legacy, reputation, and personal truth. But how sustainable is that balance under the pressure of sustained scrutiny? How long before human emotion bleeds into strategy, before fatigue, doubt, or shock forces cracks in the armor? Outside, the media narrative had already begun to swirl. Reporters tweeted fragments of testimony, commentators speculated on body language, and social media audiences constructed interpretations, some accurate, some wildly speculative, and all deeply influential. What's remarkable is not the immediacy of public judgment, but the way it forces subjects like Harry into a dual reality, navigating the actual courtroom while simultaneously navigating a parallel courtroom of perception where every action is analyzed, ranked, and judged in real time. And then there were the whispers, rumors of prior meetings, confidential exchanges, perhaps even undisclosed settlements. Each added layer, each hint of backstory, thickened the tension. What wasn't said in open court became almost as important as what was. Could the outcome hinge not on the presented evidence alone, but on the gaps, the silences, and the nuances only insiders could perceive? The courtroom was alive, in a sense, but not in the obvious way. It pulsed with undercurrents, with emotional and psychological currents, that the untrained eye might miss, but that insiders and history watchers could not ignore. And here lies a crucial point for viewers. This isn't just about a prince or a celebrity facing allegations. It's about understanding the collision between public accountability, personal truth, and systemic pressure. How does a man navigate a situation where every element of his life can be weaponized? What choices, what strategies, what defenses are even available? And more importantly, what happens when those strategies collide with raw human emotion? Observers would later recount that the court seemed to hold its breath at certain moments, small pauses stretching into what felt like eternities. Harry shifted in his seat, eyebrows knitted, a momentary flicker of doubt, of fatigue, of unspoken fear, or perhaps calculation. And the paradox became apparent. The very visibility that had once elevated him now rendered him extraordinarily vulnerable. Every reaction could be analyzed, every pause amplified, every glance interpreted. And then came the first wave of the evidence that would become central to the trial's narrative. Documents meticulously assembled, alleging not just errors or misjudgments, but patterns of communication, patterns of decision-making, and, according to prosecutors, patterns of deliberate misrepresentation. These weren't simple accusations. They suggested intent, coordination, and, in some interpretations, a willingness to manipulate circumstance. For Harry, the emotional impact was immediate. His jaw tightened, his fingers clenched, and for a fleeting second even those closest to him saw the weight of what he faced. Could anyone, even someone born into privilege, truly withstand this? The irony is almost unbearable. A man who spent his youth under relentless public scrutiny now confronted evidence that framed not only his past actions, but the very motives behind them. And yet, he had to respond, strategically and emotionally, in real time. No pause, no retreat, no room for error. What's more, the courtroom was not merely a legal arena. It was a theater. And in any theater, the audience, in this case the public, plays a role, however indirect. Social media feeds, headlines, and expert commentary all created an echo chamber. How does one perform under such conditions, knowing that every gesture might be broadcast and analyzed within minutes, stripped of nuance, reframed, and weaponized? As the first hours of testimony progressed, subtle shifts became apparent. Harry's posture, once rigid, occasionally slumped. His eyes betrayed moments of disbelief, of calculation, of exhaustion. Legal aides whispered advice. Observers wondered, was this composure, fatigue, or a deeper, more profound reckoning? Could a man trained to face public pressure ever truly anticipate this kind of emotional and psychological strain? The trial at this stage was only beginning to reveal its shape. What seemed procedural, mundane even, gradually took on layers of tension. What initially appeared as routine questioning now suggested deeper strategies, hidden motives, and implications that stretched far beyond the courtroom walls. Each word carried weight. Each pause invited speculation. Each reaction became evidence, interpretation, or fodder for the public imagination. And yet, despite the mounting tension, despite the gravity of the allegations, there was an almost cinematic quality to Harry's presence. A combination of vulnerability and resolve. A man confronting forces that threatened not just his reputation, but the fragile core of personal identity. Observers, whether inside the courtroom or across the world, were drawn into the suspense, into the question, what would he do next? How would he respond to the mounting pressure? The courtroom, the documents, the accusations, they were all part of a larger narrative still unfolding. And as Harry listened, calculated, and responded, the stakes escalated. Not just for him, but for everyone around him. Friends, family, advisors, lawyers, all were now participants in a drama whose ending remained unknowable. But the most shocking moment was yet to come. The testimony, the evidence, the cross-examinations, they were all leading to a revelation that would shake not just Harry, but the very structure of the trial itself. Something that no one in that courtroom, no journalist, no aide, no casual observer, expected. And in that moment, the fragile equilibrium of strategy, emotion, and perception would begin to collapse. And then there were the accusations. Conspiracy, fraud, dishonesty, words heavy with implication, words that could irreparably stain reputations, alter alliances, and redefine public perception. It was almost surreal. Prince Harry, known to the world as the young rebellious royal who had stepped away from the institution he was born into, now faced allegations that cut to the core of integrity itself. Could a man who had so carefully navigated his post-royal life truly withstand the weight of this scrutiny? Or would the courtroom, in its cold, unyielding logic, finally find a crack in his carefully maintained armor? The story starts here, but the threads stretch far back. Legal battles, private settlements, moments captured and leaked to the public, all building toward this courtroom climax. But the question we must ask ourselves, as viewers, as participants in this unfolding drama, what does this mean for the very idea of privacy in the modern world? And more importantly, how does a man like Prince Harry, who once seemed untouchable, navigate a world where every misstep, every misinterpreted gesture can be used against him? There was a palpable tension in the courtroom, an almost cinematic contrast between the polished veneer of the building and the raw human drama playing out inside. Reporters craned their necks, legal experts whispered analysis to one another, and social media, as always, churned with speculation before a single ruling had even been delivered. The paradox was stark. Prince Harry, a man whose life had been exposed relentlessly since childhood, was now fighting not for fame, not for recognition, but for the most basic human right, to be allowed moments of life untouched by external scrutiny. And yet, Even as the public debated, as analysts dissected previous lawsuits and leaked correspondences, there was a deeper, more personal story unfolding. Because this wasn't only about headlines or press freedom. This was about trust, loyalty, and the fragile web of relationships that can either protect or betray a person in their most vulnerable hour. Who could he trust? Which allies had motives that might not be apparent? And, perhaps most unsettling of all, was he prepared for what he was about to hear? The verdict would not merely be a statement of law, it would be a reckoning. A moment where years of carefully constructed defense, legal maneuvering, and public positioning could either hold or crumble entirely. But let's pause for a moment and reflect. How did it come to this? How did Prince Harry, the prince who once captured the world's imagination with candid interviews, public service, and a palpable empathy for causes close to his heart, find himself accused of conspiracy, fraud, and dishonesty? The answer is complex, layered, and fraught with irony. It is a story that threads through tabloid reports, private correspondences, court filings, and intimate recollections, some authentic, some disputed. And as the pieces fall together, one cannot help but feel a tension building, a sense of inevitability, that something dramatic was on the horizon. Even the casual observer could sense it, the undercurrent of unease that permeated every corner of the court. Security was tight. Journalists from across the globe had gathered. Legal experts spoke in hushed tones, occasionally glancing at the entrance where Prince Harry would soon appear. There was a sense that this was more than a trial. It was a stage set for a collision between private truth and public spectacle. And in that collision lay the human story, a man confronting judgment not only from the law but from the world. There is something inherently tragic in this scenario. We often think of royalty as untouchable, elevated beyond ordinary human struggles. But moments like this reveal the stark reality. Status, wealth, and titles cannot shield a person from vulnerability, from the profound weight of accusations that cut to the heart of character.